Good morning. So today we're going to start reviewing for your test. So to get your review sheet out, and we'll go from there. All right. So the first part is finding the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So remember, the vertex is negative b over 2a, and then the function evaluated at negative b over 2a. And that's going to be your vertex. And the axis of symmetry is going to be the x part of the vertex. Okay? All right. So the axis of symmetry is going to be the x part. So it's negative b over 2a. So this is going to be a negative 10 over 2 times, that is a negative, so it's a negative 1. Remember, your a is what's in front of your x squared, your b is what's in front of your x, and then your c is your number at the end. So negative 10 divided by negative 2 is going to be a positive 5. So the axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 5. Okay, so to find the vertex, now I'm going to take 5 and I'm going to plug that back in. So it's going to be a negative 5 squared plus a 10 times 5 minus a 28. So that's going to be a negative 25 plus a 50 minus a 28. So it's going to be a negative 3. So the vertex is going to be 5 comma negative 3. Good? Okay, let's do another. So here is graphing quadratic equations. So first thing I need to find is the axis of symmetry. So it's negative b over 2a. So this is going to be a negative times a negative 8 all over 2 times a, which is a 1. So negative times a negative 8 is a positive 8. 8 divided by 2 is going to be a 4. So your axis of symmetry is going to be at 4. Okay, so that's what's going to tell us right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So at 4 here, okay, at x equals 4 there, that means that that's where my symmetry is. So remember, that means what the right side, I don't know what it's going to be, but the right side, that's going to be what the left side also looks like. Okay? Sorry, where is it now? So it's symmetrical. Okay. So then the vertex here, then I'm going to plug in 4 into my problem. So it's going to be 4 squared minus an 8 times a 4 plus a 15. So 4 squared, 16. 16 minus 32 plus a 15. Okay, so that's going to be a negative 1. So my vertex is going to be at 4, negative 1. Okay, so the vertex is going to be 4 down to negative 1 there. Okay. Alright, so the domain here is all real numbers, so it's a quadratic, so it's always going to be all real numbers. So remember, negative infinity to positive infinity. Okay. The range here, now I need to graph it to figure out the range. So if that's going to be my axis of symmetry, I need to find the zeros. So if I find the zeros, that means I'm going to set the quadratic equal to 0, and I'm going going to solve. So I'm trying to find the zeros, I'm trying to find where it crosses the x-axis. Can I factor that? X squared minus 8x plus a 15 is equal to 0. So 15, what multiplies together to give you 15 and adds together to give you negative 8. So it's going to be an x minus a 3 times an x minus a 5. So x is going to be equal to a 3, and x is going to be equal to 5. So that means that it's going to have zeros at 3, 5. Means it's going to cross the x-axis at 3 and 5. Okay, so it's going to be symmetrical there. Okay. So the range there, that means the lowest point is going to be at that 4 there, down to that negative 1. Okay, so the range, the stopping point, is going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. So that means that my y values are going to be greater than or equal to a negative 1. Whoops, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to plug some numbers in there. Okay, my vertex is going to be down here at 4, negative 1. So I'm going to take numbers to the left of that, and I'm going to take numbers to the right of that. Okay, so I'm going to go backwards, 3, 2, 1, 5, 6, 7. So if I plug in a 3, at 3 it's going to be a 0. 5, it's going to be a 0. If I plug in 2, 2 squared minus an 8 times 2 plus a 15. So if I plug in a 2, that should give me a 3. If I plug in a 1, it's going to give me an 8. If I plug in 6, that'll give me a 3. If I plug in 7, that'll give me an 8. So remember, you're plugging it in for that x. Okay, so at 2, I'm going to be at 3 here. At 1, I'm going to be up here at 8. Okay, at 6, I'm going to be at 3. And at 7, I'm going to be at 8. So it's symmetric. Okay. So that is how you would graph. Okay. So what about this? Write the quadratic in standard form. So this is not in standard form. This is actually considered vertex form. Okay. So standard form, that means I would have to get it in the form ax squared plus bx plus a c. Okay, so I'm going to say x minus 3 times x minus 3 plus a 5. So I'm going to multiply. So x times x gives me an x squared. X times negative 3 gives me a negative 3x. Negative 3 times x gives me a negative 3x. And negative 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9. So combine your like terms, so you'll get x squared minus a 6x plus a 14. So that would be standard form there. Okay? Alright, what about here? Identify the factors of the quadratic equation below. Write your answers in the boxes. Okay? So that's a negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So that would be one of my vertex, or x-intercepts would be at negative 3, and the other one here is going to be at x is equal to a 2. Okay, so remember, you move it over, and move it over. So 1 is going to be x plus 3, and 1 is going to be x minus 2. Okay? But if we wanted to write it in standard form, we would have to multiply this out. So x times x gives me an x squared. X times negative 2 is a negative 2x. 3 times x is a 3x. And 3 times negative 2 is a negative 6. So this will be x squared plus an x minus a 6. Okay? Alright, remember when we solved quadratic equations by factoring? Okay? Or using the quadratic formula, we have to get it equal to 0. Okay? So this one, number 5 here, I would have to move that 44 to the other side. So when I move that positive 44 to the other side, I'm going to make it a minus 44. Okay, so now remember, I asked myself what multiplies together to give me a negative 44 and adds together to give me a negative 7. So that is going to be a negative 11 and a positive 4. Let's set both of those equal to 0. So x is going to be an 11 and x is going to be a negative 4. So you can write them in the solution set here. Okay. Alright, what about for number 6 there? Move the 30x to the other side, and it's going to go, remember it has to be in standard form, so it's going to go in between the 75 and the 3. Okay. This one you ask yourself, is there a greatest common factor? And there is. There's a 3. That's my greatest common factor. So I'll be left with x squared minus a 10x plus a 25. Alrighty. So now, can I factor x squared minus 10x plus a 25? So does something multiply together to give me 25 and add together to give me a negative 10? So that is an x minus a 5 and an x minus a 5. Okay, you're going to set your factors equal to 0. Set each one equal to 0. Well, 3, that's not going to be equal to 0, so that's not true. But x is going to be equal to 5, and x is going to also be equal to another 5. So it's really only one solution there. So that means it's only going to cross the x-axis at 5. Okay. What about here? We've got 9x squared minus a 3x is equal to a 0. So I need to factor first. Can I factor out an x? And can I factor out a 9? So I could take out a 9 and an x, and I would be left with x minus a, not 6, sorry, crazy, 4. So you would set 9x is equal to 0, and you would set x minus 4 is equal to 0. So x would be equal to 0, and x would be equal to a 4. Okay. Alright, what about this next one? Number 8 here. I could solve this one by taking the square root, because it's x squared and it's your c term. So that means I can move my negative 10 to the other side and make it a, not a 10, a positive 100. Okay, and then when I do that, then I can take the square root of both sides. So x here is going to be equal to a positive and a negative 10. Okay. If you you didn't do it that way, you could do it by factoring, right? So x squared minus 100 is a difference of 2 squares, so it's going to be an x minus 10 times an x plus a 10. We set both of those equal to a 0. So x is going to be 10, and x is going to be a negative 10. Okay? Okay. So what about this one? So to solve this one by factoring, the first thing it has to do is to be equal to a 0. So I need to multiply this out. So x times x gives me a x squared. X times 3 is a 3x. Negative 7 times x is a negative 7x. And negative 7 times 3 is a negative 21. Okay, so that'll be x squared minus a 4x minus a 21. Okay, the reason I need to do that first is because it was factored, but it was factored and equal to 24. And you can't set the factors equal to 24. You can only set the factors equal to a 0. Okay, so now I need to move the 24 to the other side. So when I subtract, it's going to be x squared minus a 4x minus a 45. And now you try to factor. So what multiplies together to give you a negative 45 and adds together to give you a negative 4? So that'll be a negative 9 and a positive 5. Okay, and set both of those equal to a 0. So x is going to be equal to a 9, and x is going to be equal to a negative 5. So those are my solutions. And those are considered my x-intercepts. Okay? Alright. Quadratic formula. Okay. Remember your quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So, but it has to be in standard form first, so that means for number 10 here, I need to move the 18 to the other side. So it's going to become a negative 18. Okay, so my a here is going to be a 1, my b is a negative 1, and my c is a negative 18. So a negative times a negative 1 plus or minus the square root of a b squared minus 4 times a times a c all over 2 times 1. So it's going to be 1 plus or minus 1, negative 4 times a negative 18 is a positive 72. So then this will be 1 plus or minus square root of 73. All over 2. So you'll have 1 plus square root of 73 divided by 2. So you'll have a 4.77. And then you'll have a 1 minus square root of 73 divided by 2. And a negative 3.77. Okay. Alright, so the same thing over here applies. I need to get it in standard form. So this is 8x squared. Move the 20x to the other side. Okay, so my a is an 8. My b is a negative 20. And my c is a 0. Okay, so we'll have a positive 20 plus or minus square root of negative 20 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So this will be a 20 plus or minus, what's that, 400? And then that's 0, so it's going to go away. And then 2 times 8 is 16. Okay, so square root of 400 is actually a 20. So that's going to be 20 plus or minus 20 divided by 16. So 20 plus a 20 divided by 16. So that's going to be 2.5. And 20 minus 20 divided by 16, which will be a 0. So those are my two solutions there. Okay. Alrighty. So let's look here. So if the area of the rectangle is 42 inches squared, find the value of x. So remember, your area is your length times your width. Okay, so that means that this is going to be your length. So x plus 8 times x minus 3, so length times width, is equal to 42. So need to multiply this out, so x times x gives me an x squared, x times negative 3 is a negative 3x, 8 times x is a positive 8x, and 8 times negative 3 is a negative 24. So we're going to have 8, so it's going to be a positive 5x. If I move my 42 to the other side, I'm going to subtract it, so it's going to be a negative 66. So now something has to multiply together to give me a negative 66 and add together to give me a 5. So that's going to be an x plus an 11 and an x minus a 6. Set both of those equal to a 0. So x is going to be a negative 11 and x is going to be a positive 6. Well, our distances are not going to be negative, so x is going to be equal to a 6 inches. Okay. Alright, let's do this one here. This is a projectile motion one. So Natalie found a tennis ball outside of a tennis court. She picked up the ball and threw it over the fence into the court. The path of the ball can be represented by h equals negative 16t squared plus 18t plus 5. Find the maximum height. So anytime you have that, that means that is the vertex. Okay, so if I wanted to find my t, which is my x, right, it's going to be negative b over 2a. So it's going to be a negative 18 all over 2 times a negative 16. Right? So if I put that in the calculator, it's going to give me a decimal. So negative 18 divided by 2 times negative 16. So it's going to be a decimal of 0.56. Oops. 25. Okay, so to find the maximum height, so that means I need to plug that in. So it's a negative 16 times your t, which I guess we could round that to 0.56. Okay. So when I plug that in the calculator, so I'm going to do 0.56 squared times a negative 16. That's like a negative, this part right here is a 0.0176. 18 times 0.56 plus 10.08. So it's going to be about, the height is going to be about 10.06 feet. Okay, so when it's asking for the maximum height, it's looking for the vertex, but it's looking for the y part of the vertex. In this case, it'll be the h part of the vertex. Okay? Alright, the b part says, how long will it take to reach the ground? So that means that when is your height going to be equal to a 0? Okay, so you're going to say a negative 16t squared plus an 18t plus a 5. When is it going to be equal to a 0? Okay, let's see if I can factor that. So negative 16 times a 5 is a negative 80. Is there something that multiplies together to give me a negative 80 and adds together to give me a positive 18? No, because 10 times 8 gives you an 80, but they would both have to be the same sign. So I don't think so. So let's use the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is a negative b, so it's going to be a negative 18 plus or minus b squared, so 18 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times the negative 16. So it'll be negative 18 plus or minus 18 squared and then 4 times 16 times 5 plus a 320 all over a negative 32. So that'll be a negative 18 plus or minus square root of 644 divided by negative 32. Okay, so that'll be a negative 18 plus the square root of 644 divided by negative 32. Okay, so that'll be a negative 0.23 or negative 18 minus the square root of 644 divided by negative 32 or 1.3555, so 1.36. Going to throw out the negative because our times can't really be negative. So it'll be 1.36 seconds. Okay? Alright, let's look here. So if I was to look, Debbie recorded the time it took 7 children of different ages to run a lap around the track. Use an equation to model the data. Find the approximate time it would take for a 6-year-old to run a lap. So this is going to be a linear regression here. So this is going to be y equals a negative 12.13 x plus a 272.27. Okay, remember you put your x values here in for your x values in your data set in your stat area, and the time would be your y values. Okay, and remember then you hit stat, then over to calc, and then linear. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to let x equal a 6 for a 6-year-old. So I'm going to say y equals a negative 12.13 times 6 plus a 272.27. So what's that? 199.49 seconds. Okay. So that is a good review for your test that is going to be tomorrow. I hope y'all have a great day.